Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate and the first television interview with the new Foreign Secretary, Nirupama Rao. Foreign Secretary, let's start with Pakistan. 2 feather-in attacks in Kashmir within 24 hours, rocket attacks at Atari and Punch, frequent firing across the international border, and all of this within the space of a week. How do you view these developments?
With great concern, Karan. Terrorism, and you know the whole phenomenon of cross-border terrorism, as it affects us today, hasn't diminished in any manner. And all the events you've seen over the last few days basically point to the basic and undeniable fact that the infrastructure of terrorism, which operates out of Pakistan and territory under Pakistan control, has not been dismantled. And it continues to be directed against the Indian people. It affects ordinary people. Terrorism affects people like you and me.
The recent terrorist attack at Lal Chowk in Srinagar was clearly masterminded by handlers in Pakistan. Do you have any idea who they are? Are they the Harkatul Mujahideen as the press suggests, or could they be the Lashkar-e-Toiba who are responsible for 26/11 in Mumbai?
Well, all I'd like to say, Karan, is that whichever group they may belong to, they are essentially part of the same species. These are terrorism-spewing, violence-generating people who have an agenda of violence and mayhem to pursue.
And these are clearly, therefore, people operating out of Pakistan?
Obviously.
Do you believe that they have some form of assistance or support from the Pakistani establishment or state?
Well, let me put it this way. I think the experience over the last 2 decades would make it very clear to us that this has been an instrument of state policy which has been pursued by agencies within Pakistan.
And that is clearly the case in what happened in Kashmir the other day as well.
We have very little or even no evidence to suggest otherwise.
Now, the telephone intercepts have the Pakistani handlers making it absolutely clear that they are seeking to revive violence and militancy in Kashmir. This happened days after President Zardari committed his own government to fulfilling his father-in-law Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's pledge for a 1,000-year war to liberate Kashmir. Are the two linked?
Well, militancy and violence in Kashmir is a long-standing phenomenon. We have seen it happen over and over again for many, many years now. And this has been accompanied by rhetoric directed against India, all forms and means of propaganda that comes across from the Pakistan side. So rhetoric, militancy and violence, together they make a very combustible combination.
And President Zardari's rhetoric is a facilitating or encouraging factor behind the sort of terrorism we witnessed.
Let me say that rhetoric hardly helps the situation. It poisons people's minds.
And clearly President Zardari's rhetoric has been unhelpful, it's been poisonous.
Rhetoric is always unhelpful in situations such as these.
Many analysts believe that as President Obama's AfPak strategy starts to put pressure on the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in the West, they'll seek to deflect attention by carrying out terrorist attacks on India in the East. Is that now starting to happen?
The AfPak strategy announced by President Obama in December, the details of it, that is directed against terrorism in our region. It seeks to eliminate the sources of terrorism in Pakistan. It is also focused on the sources of terrorism which operates out of areas contiguous to Afghanistan. Having said that, I would also say that the United States has been sensitized to our concerns about terrorism that operates from areas contiguous to our border with Pakistan against our people. And I believe the US is sensitive to these concerns.
Absolutely. But let's leave the US sensitivity aside. We can come to that later. Do you also feel that as US pressure on the Taliban and Al-Qaeda increases, they might be tempted to deflect attention by carrying out terrorist attacks on India in the East?
Well, Karan, I would respond to that by saying that eternal vigilance is the price that we have to pay in all these situations. And we have to be constantly alert to this possibility.
Let's broaden our discussion a little. Amidst persistent political turmoil and relentless terror, how worried are you about the internal political situation in Pakistan?
Terrorism and violence within Pakistan, and you've seen a rise in levels of both terrorism and violence within Pakistan, clearly reverberates beyond Pakistan's borders. We've said over and over again that we would like a secure, a stable, a peaceful Pakistan. Obviously, violence and terrorism in Pakistan and manifestations of what you refer to as instability concern all of us.
So as Pakistan begins to appear to collapse under its internal problems, India becomes threatened as well.
I'm not going to make any prognosis on that. I think that really is not part of my brief. But as I said, we are close neighbors of Pakistan.
And we're affected.
We would naturally be concerned about instability or rise in levels of terrorism and increased violence within that country.
Now, in November in Washington, the Prime Minister said, and I quote him, "I don't know who to deal with in Pakistan." This was in the interview he gave CNN. Does this mean that you don't believe that President Zardari's civilian government are the right people to talk to?
We deal with the government of Pakistan. Obviously, we have a relationship, a diplomatic relationship with Pakistan. We are in touch with representatives of the Pakistan government for whatever reason. Over and over again, we are in contact. There are issues, humanitarian issues that exist between the two countries. So that relationship continues to be transacted. The levels of dialogue obviously are much diminished after the Mumbai attacks.
Before I come to the question of dialogue and the level of dialogue, how stable do you think President Zardari is?
Again, I don't want to pronounce a judgment on the stability or otherwise of the leadership in Pakistan. We, as I said, would advocate and have advocated always the need for a stable, secure, a peaceful Pakistan, because that helps the Pakistan people, it helps relations with India, it helps the neighborhood.
The press, both in the West and in India, are beginning to speculate about the possibility of another military takeover in Pakistan. Does the government of India believe that that now looks more likely than it did, say, earlier on?
Let me say that we consistently and closely monitor developments in Pakistan. It is our neighbor. It is a country that is next door to us. And as I said, developments in Pakistan are of relevance to the entire region. And obviously, the growth of civil society, the strengthening of democratic institutions in Pakistan is good for our region.
So clearly, India wouldn't favor a military takeover. We wouldn't welcome one.
Really, to speak out on Pakistan's internal affairs, I think, would not be advisable.
Now, on the other hand, the Pakistan High Commissioner in Delhi has said that it's unfortunate there's no dialogue between Delhi and Islamabad, given that India at Sharm el-Sheikh committed itself to action on terrorism should not be linked to the composite dialogue process. And secondly, that dialogue is the only way forward. Is there a possibility that in this new year, 2010, we could see the resumption of dialogue?
Dialogue between India and Pakistan is obviously the way forward for normalization of relations and to resolve outstanding issues between the two countries. We in India have never turned our back on dialogue with Pakistan. But let me also add that terrorism is a standalone phenomenon, but terrorism affects the climate of dialogue. It affects the prospects for progress of this dialogue. And when Pakistan refers to the need to resume composite dialogue, we say you have to create the right atmosphere for that dialogue to move forward.
Can I put this to you? How much credit do you give Islamabad for the fact that there has been no major terrorist attack or strike since 26/11?
I think it's too early to give credit or otherwise to Pakistan for what has or has not happened. Terrorism directed against India continues from territory under Pakistan control and from Pakistan. Look at what has been happening in Srinagar over the last few weeks. Look at the incidents of infiltration that have gone up despite the fact that this is cold weather. In winter, traditionally, we haven't had so many incidents of infiltration, but those continue. They clearly point to the continuation of efforts directed against our territory, directed in order to foment violence in Kashmir and terrorist incidents.
So clearly, Pakistan needs to do more before India is convinced that it is effectively responding to the terror India faces, which emanates out of Pakistani soil.
Karan, let me say Pakistan can do more.
And you're waiting for that before any talks resume?
We wait and we hope Pakistan can do more.
What about the opinion expressed by some analysts that if India were to resume the dialogue process, it might strengthen Islamabad's hands in delivering on terror?
I know this school of thought, and it, I think, especially has gained some currency in Pakistan in recent months. But let's look at it this way. Terrorism is not a tap you turn on and off because of the absence of or prevalence of dialogue. Dialogue does not flow from the barrel of the gun, Karan.
There's another problem which seems to be also occurring, which is that the Indian government's refusal to talk seems to have hardened attitudes in Pakistan. The popular mood has turned to resentment. Some even say there's a simmering anger towards India. Does that worry you?
Well, it is a matter of concern that the people of Pakistan are being fed with slanted and biased accounts of what India's attitude may be. India's attitude is for dialogue and to promote the peaceful resolution of problems with Pakistan. But Karan, all of us who have grown up against the background of what has happened in this relationship, I think there is a sense of déjà vu that I get. And I feel a sense of sadness also that people, ordinary people in Pakistan, are being missiled by propaganda of this sort.
And so your position remains that we want further proof of Pakistan's action on terror before the dialogue process resumes.
As I said, Pakistan can do much more to deliver on this subject.
And must do much more.
And must do much more.
Foreign Secretary, let's take a break there. I want to come back and talk to you about Australia and briefly about the United States of America. That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the new Foreign Secretary, Nirupama Rao. Foreign Secretary, let's start this part with the increasing spate of attacks on Indians in Australia. Are you satisfied with the response of the Australian government?
Well, we've been in close touch with the Australian government since these attacks began. And unfortunately, there has been a spate of these attacks, violence directed against innocent and hapless, I would say, young Indians who have been the target of such violence. The Australian government has been sensitized to our concerns, and we have impressed upon them that they need to do more to address the cause of this violence and to bring the perpetrators to book, because you need to restore the climate of confidence and security among Indians living in Australia.
So when you say you've impressed upon them the need to do more, that clearly suggests that they weren't doing enough.
I would say that the Australian government has engaged with us closely in the wake of the attacks, and there has been a continuing dialogue and communication. As you know, we have a good relationship with Australia. From the Australian side, it's often defined as excellent, and we have shared that assessment, but we must not let these events cast a shadow on the relationship.
Let me quote to you the Indian Minister for Overseas Affairs, Vaila Ravi, speaking on the 9th of this month. He says, why can't they arrest them and put them behind bars and prosecute them? It is very unfortunate that things are not moving as they promised. It is very disturbing for all of us in the government. Clearly, Mr. Ravi feels that the Australians are not doing enough.
I think there is legitimate concern, and the Minister of Overseas Indian Affairs has expressed that legitimate sense of concern that we feel.
The MEA shares that concern?
Obviously, we share the concern of in regard to a situation where our citizens are being attacked.
Now, the Indian press are particularly concerned that the Australian government is reluctant to accept that racism could be a substantive motive or cause behind these attacks. What's your assessment? What's the government's view? Is racism a factor?
Well, let's look at the situation. You've had one community targeted. You've had persons belonging to one community targeted. And these attacks have kept occurring. I mean, there's been a certain pattern of these attacks. Now, what the Australians tell us is that you could attribute this to urban violence, opportunistic violence, but that racism could also be an element in this. So let's see. The investigations are going on, but we are concerned that it's just this one community that has been targeted.
Twice or thrice you said that there's just one community that's being targeted and the attacks keep happening. And yet your ministry has advised the Indian press to exercise restraint. Do you believe that their coverage has been exaggerated or unbalanced?
Well, let me say that the media feels the pulse of the people, definitely. And the people of India are concerned about the attacks that have happened in Australia. Having said that, I would also like to add that you have to place every reaction you make in the larger context. And there is a very large number of Indians who live in Australia, who've made Australia their home over the decades. And you must ensure that while you must report without fear or favor, your responses, your assessments have to be calibrated and measured to the extent possible.
So, in other words, the press should keep things in context.
In context, yes.
Let's turn briefly to the United States of America. You mentioned America in part one. I want to pick up on something that you spoke about. As the Obama administration's AFPAC strategy begins to work out, it's clear to everyone that its success is critically dependent upon the cooperation President Obama gets from Pakistan. Does that mean that there could be a time when President Obama becomes sensitive to Pakistan's view that the terror India faces is linked to Kashmir? Does that possibility worry you?
I'm not worried about that because the United States is fully sensitized to our concerns on these issues. They consulted us closely in the run-up to the AFPAC strategy's formulation, and we continue to remain in close touch with our American interlocutors on this. America is well aware of India's approach to these issues, our concerns about terrorism emanating from Pakistan, our desire to see a secure and stable Afghanistan, and that will involve tackling the sources of terrorism in our region. And America understands that Pakistan continues to provide safe haven to a number of terrorists operating in our region.
I suppose the key issue here is the following. Is President Obama looking to play a more assertive role in sorting out Kashmir than India would be willing to accept?
Well, current President Obama and the American administration have told us over and over again that they have no desire to play a mediatory role on issues concerning India and Pakistan.
Even though he says different things in the letters he sends President Zardari in November, just before his December AFPAC speech, even though in his original AFPAC speech of March he spoke about constructive diplomacy, despite those contradictory statements or commitments, you still believe that he doesn't want to play a role?
I don't believe there is contradiction here. The relationship between India and the United States is a strategic global partnership, and there is confidence, there is trust in this communication that India and the United States have, and the United States is well aware of our position on
My
this.
last question too, is there a danger that India and Pakistan could be rehyphenated, either because of the way the Obama administration views South Asia or because of the way events are playing out?
Well, Karan, the logic of the relationship and the logic of the times defies that. Defies your assessment. There is no question of this relationship being rehyphenated, as you say. Our relationship with the United States is a mature relationship. It is one of the defining partnerships of the times, as President Obama said so eloquently during our Prime Minister's visit.
Foreign Secretary, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.